Sunday morning. It is the third Sunday. And so on the third Sunday, we have Cliff Winnig is here to introduce us to his guests and what we're going to talk about today. As always, you can make your comments, and if and we are recorded on Big Cubed project or the Big Cube page on YouTube. So anybody wants to go look for it, they can. And that said, I will let you go, Cliff, and carry it away.
Good morning, everyone. Today's subject is what makes for good science fiction? And I have assembled a panel of experts to answer this question. My experts include returning guest Thaddeus Howze, who is a science fiction writer, and the answer man. He answers questions. He's very good at research and articulating good answers to questions. And also, he writes a lot of criticism, science fiction criticism, which he blogs about. Yeah, you do. You do. Yeah. He is the author of Hayward's Reach, collection of short stories.
Oh, that's not glare. That's the cover.
That's the cover.
Yep, and we should probably get the link into the if you put the link in the private chat, Bob can stick the QR code and stuff.
Okay, tell you what, you send me a note over in private chat, and I will get it off
at some point during this. Yes. So, and my other guest is Rich Horton, who is a writer and mostly essayist, book reviewer, and editor, who has spent many years editing year's best anthologies, of which this is an example. And he has many anthologies out for Prime Books over the years. He is extremely well read. He's one of the things that drew me to his particular best of anthologies was that the pool that he drew stories from was extremely large because he read so much. So Rich is our first time guest here, and hopefully not the last time. And then also I thought Bob could maybe stick around for a bit since he is a writer, editor, and publisher of BQ Press. And so all of these folks can tell you about what makes for good science fiction. I'll also note that I have my Dune mug, which is generally considered good science fiction, although there are people who disagree with that assessment. I think certainly for early 1960s, it was great science fiction. All right. So anyone want to jump in and tell me what something that makes it, I mean, it can be, to my mind, science fiction to be really good has to have all the things that literature has, which is, plot, character, story, mood, language, all of those things. Plus, it has to have some kind of science fiction element that's integral, not just, pasted on. For example, Handmaid's Tale, right? You can't tell that story without the science fiction, the social science fiction of what happened, right? Dune is, there's a science fiction idea, as the joke goes, what if an entire planet was made out of cocaine, right? And so how would that affect society? There are different ideas, but the characters and the plot and the intrigue, court intrigue there and all of that is necessary for it to go from cool idea to good science fiction. So, gentlemen, anyone want to dive in and talk about an element of good science fiction?
Well, I'll tell you what.
Okay, Bob.
Well, since I know you've got two guests here that are so good at it that once they get going, I'm going to be like ashamed to talk. I am going to tell you that I found a series that I think epitomizes what good science fiction is, and that's called the Bobberverse. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the Bobiverse. It's
Well,
what
I'm
happened.
not averse to the Bobiverse, however.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it's just literally everything about science fiction you love. It's got villains. What happens is a guy who's gets run over when a bunch of Klingons at a science fiction convention run out into the street, and the car veers around him and hits him while he's standing in a crosswalk. Uh, well, and then they wake him up 100 years later, and he finds out that AIs never really took off like they were supposed to, but they did find out that the brains of these people that they had frozen made fairly good, useful things for running dump trucks. And
It could happen.
yeah, and he then he gets selected to be on a von Neumann probe, sent out to investigate the universe, and this is his story. His name is Bob, by the way, and
Which is, I'm sure, another thing you approve of in this particular case.
well, it sounds better than the Jasonoverse. You know,
It lets people say, as you know, Bob, to him all the time.
but I thought it was pretty good. And but it did have just what you said, everything you needed. It had good writing, it had plot, it had villains, it had character growth and development. Um, because a character who never changes is just Destroyer number 74. And
You had to go there, did you?
wait, you didn't write that, did you?
No. I admit to having read 30 or so of them, and no judgment. No judgment.
Anyway,
Yeah, I've read a lot of science fiction, but I've never seen, for example, character development of Gore, or still waiting for that one.
I'll take a shot here.
Go
What
for it.
makes good science fiction? All right, I've read a lot of science fiction, thousands of books, and probably tens of thousands of short stories. And I think the stuff that has always made me pay attention was the things that made me wonder, things that made me think, things that made me ask, why don't we do that? Why is it we are not able to get that done? Wonder, complexity. These are the nuanced things I think that when you write good science fiction, the reader is left asking either, hey, we shouldn't invent that torment nexus, or perhaps we should invent this new thing that we've been sitting around ignoring for decades, and we should actually handle that problem sometime soon. You know, having sentient sewage is bad, and we should fix that. So
That was the whole plot of Godzilla versus the Smog Monster.
So I mean, you know, so good science fiction, it challenges the expectations of people who are out here doing whatever they're doing and giving them a chance to imagine a world that's either better or worse. And unfortunately, worse seems to be the thing that's taking off right now. I miss utopian-esque science fiction. The idea that we could tell stories where, in the end, good things can happen to the adventurers, you know, even if the world itself is not always a great place. So yeah, good science fiction is wonder and complexity. Those are the two things I look for. Maybe a little nuance. It doesn't have to be too nuanced, you know. I get the idea stories should have a theme or an underlying texture, but I feel like if it's starting to get like that, then I might as well go ahead and read some Shakespeare. You know, I should be reading stuff that already exists, that's full of good nuance. And if your science fiction has so much nuance that I have to be tearing it apart to enjoy it, that's too much work. I read science fiction to escape, to have a good time. I don't read science fiction to find myself so bound up in tightness and tautness that it just drives me crazy. That's why a foundation always annoyed me. It's a very long story with a very good premise, but it just took so long to get there. Help me. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Rich.
I'll just mention briefly that Steve Barnes, science fiction writer Stephen Barnes, recommends reading Shakespeare regularly because he does for the language. Anyway, go ahead, Rich.
Oh, I recommend that too. And that's one of the things I recommend all readers is to don't just read in one genre. And that counts for so-called literary readers too. They ought to be reading science fiction and crime fiction and all that. I thought of this from two directions. Top down, which is like a theory of what should make good science fiction, which is what Thaddeus was getting at, and bottom up, which is a look at some good science fiction and see what made it work, which is, I think, where Bob was going by mentioning the Bobiverse. So from a top-down notion, I think, besides the obvious that we already talked about, prose, characters, plot, so on, science fiction should have central ideas that are either interesting extrapolation, new technology, new sociological organization, whatever, different ways to be human, be one way to put it, or a science fiction idea, novum, it's been called, that may be totally implausible, but that is useful in telling a story that illuminates something, either just something fun or something important about character or about human problems or whatever, or about technological problems. And then it should be through compose, which means take your idea and don't just show the idea, but show what the effects would be, both good and bad, about this idea. There's so many inventions that we think of that are really cool inventions, and we make them for something useful, and the first thing that happens is somebody figures out how to do something awful with it.
Or they use it for porn because that's,
right. That's the
that's how all
that's
new
what,
technology.
that's what pays for the early adoption of almost any technology, I think. But, so
I wish that wasn't true, but it actually is, and so I'm
Nope.
It's sad, but it's true.
And there's not a lot of science fiction about that, and that's probably okay.
JPEGs, moving video, all of that. Yeah.
Photocopiers. Right,
Yes.
That's the problem.
Yeah,
But anyway, don't need to undermine your point, Rich, which is an excellent point. And also, I can't help thinking the point that would be made by an anthologist, because you have done not only a bunch of year's bests, but you've also done themed anthologies like space opera and combat and other things like that. So obviously you publish what you like, but how do you go about, I'm sure there's like, for every book that you have 20 stories in, there's another 20 stories that could have been in the book that are almost equally good or whatever, and you have to make choices. So how do you kind of navigate that space? What do you look for?
I used to say my typical year's best anthologies have 30 stories or so. It's about as much room as I have. In a typical year, there's 10 stories I need to have. And for the remaining 20 stories, there's at least 50 that I could use. And so, there's some little rules like never more than 2 stories by the same writer, and rarely that. Try to get a diversity of sources. Some stories, no more than 4 stories, let's say, from a single magazine, various anthologies, online sources, collections. I try to go to places that a lot of science fiction writers might not have seen. Literary magazines like the New Yorker or whatever, obscure story collections that haven't been widely seen, that sort of thing. And I try to make sure that I'm reading stories by writers I'm not familiar with. New writers from other countries, writers from different backgrounds than I have. Because one of the things about science fiction is it's supposed to be about, one of the biggest themes of science fiction is differences, aliens, the far future where everything's different, whatever it might be. So if we are not willing to listen to different voices, people from China, people from Africa, people who have disabilities, people who are older than us, younger than us, we're ignoring one of the most important things we're supposed to be exploring in science fiction, which is the many different ways to be human, and for science fiction, something only science fiction can do is ways not to be human, but still to be interesting. You know, one of the best aliens are aliens that really are not humans with funny faces. Are the aliens that think completely differently from humans, or artificial intelligences as well. So.
One of my favorite aliens is Solaris because it is believably inscrutable. Like, we cannot get our brains around it.
Right.
And that's a book about the limitation of human understanding and the limitations of, human empathy. And it's quite mind-blowing for that reason. And also there's character who's interesting and a tragic backstory that he's kind of working through, and he's dealing with trauma. All this is the guy they sent to talk to the planet, and it's
so much science fiction is based on making terrible choices about who's going to do your really important job.
Yeah.
It's a lot like our current timeline. Yes. Currently,
yes.
The worst guy for the job. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I had to comment on that one. Well, making really poor choices about important jobs. Did I tell you our first book was a written 100-day anthology about the Donald Trump's presidency? Alternative Truths. So, yeah, I will encourage you to say that is a good way to make a choice for what books to write. Bad choices make good literature.
They do. Yeah. One of my teachers, Karen Joy Fowler, who has written both science fiction and mainstream literary fiction, told us one of the kind of half jokingly, but only half jokingly, told her class, one of the things that you should do is cultivate friends who are really cool, really nice, and who make terrible life decisions. And then listen to them tell you all the consequences and use that in your fiction.
Well, so not science fiction and not even literature, but a song I really love, Robert Earl Keen's "The Road Goes On Forever," is he said it's a kind of road movie sort of song about a couple who run off together to Florida and get in trouble, and one of them ends up in the electric chair. And he said
that's trouble.
he said he wrote it because just from a couple people he grew up with who said they didn't get in quite that much trouble, and none of them ended up in the electric chair, but they always made bad choices, and he took some of the bad choices they made and wove it into the song.
I mean, if you can't live a good life, be a solid cautionary tale. So yeah, I mean, and then there's also miscommunication as a great science fiction trope, like especially first contact stories, right? And another example of wonderfully inscrutable aliens and miscommunication and sort of weirdly the wrong person for the job was Ted Chiang's "This Is the Story of Your Life," which was filmed as Arrival, because this woman had a kid who was going to die young in her future, and that turns out to have made her a bad choice for the job because her mindset about that was changed in a way that wasn't maybe that beneficial for the kid. That was a kind of an interesting choice. I love those aliens.
That's the story I had on my list here of things to discuss.
Discuss away, Rich. Tell me, say something more profound about it than I just did, because there's a lot of room for that.
I don't know if I will be more profound, but partly she was the right person for the job. She did an excellent job with the aliens. Sometimes we run over people's lives because they're the right person to do what we need to be done. And that happens a lot in science fiction stories.
That's another good way of looking at it. Yeah.
But
like Louis Wu is the right person for that job. And was it Tila Brown, right? Like her life was destroyed.
Well, no, but she was lucky. It could never be destroyed.
Yes.
But the thing about Story of Your Life is that it's a really good example of using a very distinctly science fictional premise. You cannot possibly tell that story without doing science fiction. And a story that scientists tell me the new really cool idea that Chang built around it actually was slightly mistaken science.
Well, it's the Sapir-Whorf strong hypothesis, right?
Well, partly that, but more the deal about the light refraction means you're seeing in the future and all that. But that doesn't matter. And it's one of the things I wrote.
I don't care.
Science does not have to be exactly right. It just has to be illuminating. And that story is illuminating not just because it is a very interesting depiction of how aliens might see everything, including time, completely differently from the way we see it, but also it's an incredibly moving depiction of a very human thing, a woman, her child, and her mourning and celebration of her child's life. I mean, that is a story that brings me to tears, and that's
heartbreaking.
It is, and science fiction can do that. It's not just cool ideas, although thanks for the cool ideas because I love them. But it's also really great human-centered stories that can't be told without the science fictional premise.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's interesting about that particular alien's view of time is it's the same view of time that the Tralfamadorians have in Slaughterhouse-Five, which had been published, 30 years earlier. But Chang does a really completely different take on that in such a way that he makes that his own, right? Which is another thing, people say, oh, well, there are only so many ideas in science fiction. I've seen a story about robots going bad before. Why would I read another one? And there are some people who can approach a trope or idea and make it their own, which is one of the things I think that elevates good science fiction to great science fiction. Like This Is the Story of Your Life is great science fiction partly for that reason, right? Also partly because it gets the human angle completely right and makes the story about the human angle. And from the reader's point of view, kind of the human cost, more so in the story than the movie. The movie kind of gives her a pass, right?
Yeah, that's where I love the movie. It's not nearly as good as the story.
No.
And that's the fundamental thing it misses. And it would have been very hard to do in a movie. I'm not exactly blaming Villeneuve.
No, it wouldn't have been as popular, right? Because that's a hard story. Like when you find out how the kid dies in the story, it's just like, ooh, I'm not going to spoil it, but go read it if you haven't read it. Yeah.
Since you mentioned tropes, I'm going to go ahead and plug my favorite trope site, TV Tropes.
Do it.
So TVTropes.org. It's a great site. And when we're talking about science fiction, tropes don't really matter. I mean, they're like a building block for anything. And, when you're telling stories, you are going to, when I talk to a lot of young writers, the first thing it says, I want to tell a story that's never been told before. And you look at it and like, oh, you sweet summer child. There are no stories before. There are only stories you haven't told before. Stories exist. Tropes exist. They are the building blocks of stories. It isn't the story, it's the telling and the teller that make the story meaningful. So when I go to TV Tropes, and one of the things I do when I'm teaching them is, I want you to go to this site and understand that any idea that you've had, someone else has had, and has written a story about it, and there are hundreds, maybe even thousands of stories in that same premise. And the secret is to figure out which premises to pick up, merge together, and make a new story. And you'll find that they do a deconstruction of some stories. And they'll say, here's a story. And these are all the tropes we found in the story. And sometimes there's a list of like 50, 60 tropes. And some of them are just a couple of seconds. Others, they permeate the entire book. But the truth of the matter is, it is almost impossible to tell a story that doesn't contain pre-existing elements of other types of stories. And that's okay. We can tell good stories because they come from you. They are a slice of I was thinking about the other day, when I look at generative AI, we talk about generative AI, we hate it. We're awful. It's awful. It's something we don't want to be bothered with. But technically, as a writer, I am generative AI, because what you're going to do is I'm going to write a story about an idea that in this moment, right now, today, I think is great. And I will gather a bunch of information from my existence. I will piece it all together, and I have a story. And that story exists. But if I look at that story 10 years from now, I will be a different person. And the ideas that make me who I am will be different. And so now when I look back at that story, I'll go, it could have been better. It could have been different. And like generative AI, as I've moved through the versions of my existence, the nature of that story changes for me, may become better, because it may show that I was aware of a thing I didn't know I was aware of until after I'd done it. Or it may show that I was completely clueless. And that shows that I have evolved as a person. So when we're looking at storytelling, we try to get people to understand that there are no new stories. And that's okay, because it isn't the new we're looking for. What we're looking for is the you in your story. How you show up. How you made the perceptions that gave us a chance to see your idea. So tropes are cool. You can use them, and the same trope can be used by 5 different people in 5 extremely different ways. And it's great to do. So stop trying to force yourself to tell a completely new story. I mean, I guess technically it's possible, but if you read enough TV tropes, and I recommend bringing hydration and locking your pets up, and I say it because once you start reading TV tropes, you find it so fascinating. You'll find, something like the 5-man band, which is 5 characters that tell an ensemble story. You read the number of stories that come from the 5-man band and why it's superior to the 4-man band, or better than the duo. Each of these is a type of story that features a different number of characters. And each one of those things has meaning. It has significance. And you'll find that when you use them the wrong way, they're terrible stories. And they tell you this. They'll tell you these are terrible stories because they failed to use this collection properly. But when they're done right, the 5-man band, the 4-man band, they are, the 3 Musketeers. These stories, which is actually the 4-man band.
4-man band, yes. There are 4 of them.
Yeah, 4 of them. But it shows why they work, how they work, and the best way to make them work. And I think that makes for better writers, because it frees writers from the idea that they're going to be original. And that they can tell a story that is good, that is fun, that is easy to use, that people can embrace. And because the nature of tropes is that these are story elements we all know, whether we realize it or not, we can sink into and begin to take the place of a viewer and be in the story and be in that moment and connect to those characters. Because that's what you're really looking for. You're looking for connection. You're looking for a reader to connect to your characters positively or negatively. Darth Vader, of course, is a terrible person, terrible character, but everybody loves this guy. Murdering his way across the
dresser.
Again, snappy dresser. He's murdering his way across the galaxy. And because he's a character that's made connection. And the writers have skillfully managed to make you sympathize, empathize, and yet properly demonize Darth Vader. He is not a good man. He's a character struggling with everything it takes to be human, and he has failed. And so we are watching this cautionary tale, this horror, and we're not okay with it. But we recognize that everybody's story is different, and that's what makes him work. He works because he is a flawed, failed character who never manages to truly redeem himself. I'm sorry, that death scene, that's not a redemption. That's just, I was wrong. That's it. He recognizes he made mistakes, and he admits them, and then he dies. I'm like, dude, that was the worst apology ever. That's the worst apology ever. You destroyed a whole planet. You were a mess. This is not an apology. You need to be making penance for centuries to make up for the things you've done. But we acknowledge that he's failed. We acknowledge that he tried. We acknowledge his son attempts to redeem him. And the real story is not him, it's his son we just get a taste of that story along the way. And they've managed to build it over the decades that we now know that Darth Vader is a flawed character who has struggled his entire existence. But we didn't care about any of that when we meet him, because we meet him over here where he's just a monster and totally reveling in his thing. We get to go back and see him as, oh, Anakin Skywalker, you're a cute little kid with precocious abilities and superhuman talents, and your life sucks, and everything goes horribly wrong, and then people misguide you, and then they abuse you and terrorize you, you become Darth Vader. How awful that was. That is the story that we're looking at. And when you do that right, positively or negatively, that's what makes people resonate with your tale. And that's why I love TV tropes. If you've never used it and you want to be a writer, you must go there, drown yourself for a few weeks. And when you're done, you'll be cleansed. You will be reborn as a writer because you'll be free. You'll be free from that obsession of, it must be new, because you're not going to do that. And as a writer, I learned this the hard way. I was like, I'm going to tell a story no one's ever told. And I'm like, well, I've read 10,000 books. Really? Do you think you can tell a story never heard anywhere else? And the answer was no. I tried. I did. I really did try, but it really is difficult. And TV tropes freed me from that. Now I write, I just say, I'm telling a story, my story, from my spot in generative AI, in the generative AI universe of storytelling. This is my story right now in this moment. All these converging points coming together, and there's my story. It's great. I love it. Send it to the world. That's what you do. That's good science fiction.
So much to think about there. One thing is, another way to cure yourself of the idea that everything should be new is go to a little-known writer named Shakespeare and look through all his plots and find out where he really got his ideas from. And and the five-man band thing, there's a novel by a science fiction adjacent writer, I think of him as Robertson Davies, a great novel called Fifth Business, in which the fifth business is the fifth person in the five-man band, the extra in a way, but a very important character. So back to the idea of no new ideas. In the science fiction field, there probably have been some. When you read enough really old science fiction, sometimes you'll find the first use of an actual trope. And what you'll find most often is that the idea was new, but the story was pretty crappy. Because all they did was present this new idea. And what you really need to do is put your own twist on the idea, whether new or old. You will make something new, and it can be used in better ways. And just to illustrate that, just to talk about a novel I just finished, Edges by Linda Nagata, a very fine writer. It's set in the far future, and it's got robot starships that are trying to kill all humans. Everyone knows, well, not everyone. Old guys like me know that Fred Berhagen wrote a bunch of stories called Berserker stories about that. Not all humans, all intelligent life. All, it's got
organic life.
It's got uploading into computers. It's got, cloning new bodies for yourself. It's got cold sleep. It's got plausible, semi-plausible, nearly as fast as light space travel. It's got distant planets, all kinds of things we love about science fiction. None of those ideas is exactly new, but Nagata uses them in fascinating, interesting, and very sense of wonder-inducing ways. So it makes it good science fiction.
I am going to say one example where I think it was a completely original idea, and it was not only a good science fiction story, it was a great science fiction story, is Bob Shaw's Light of Other Days. And the idea was, what if you invented something called slow glass, where it's like glass, but it can take years for the light to penetrate the substance and come out the other side. So you have basically a recording idea, and a whole industry comes up where, like, you plop panes of slow glass in front of picturesque views, and then you sell them to city dwellers so that they get these nice views. But he takes that idea and then tells a tragedy using the slow glass and the narrator. And it's heartbreaking and beautiful and a new cool idea that I'd never seen before. That was like I looked it up, 1966. So there were some new ideas that hadn't been used yet in 1966. Yeah, Liam says it's one of the most mind-blowing stories I ever read. And that's not just because of the science fiction idea. It's because of the characters and the tragedy that he tells. I mean, that was like firing on all cylinders, right?
Yeah, that is, in my opinion, one of the great science fiction stories of all time. And, you know, a big claim, but it's a claim I'll make for that story.
Yep. It was nominated for the Nebula and the Hugo, but apparently did not win. You know, Algis Budrus said that it, quote, tends to make people weep. That's another.
It does that. I can attest to that. Yes.
AJ was right. Yes. We have Kitty. Another trope in science fiction.
Whenever I'm doing something on TV or in a podcast, at no other time in my life do I get any attention from him. But as soon as I start showing up on a podcast screen, for some reason he's cosmically aware. And it's like, I will be on television. And he jumps up from my lap, he shows up, he cameos, and it's like, okay, my work is done. And he leaves. And it's
he's a diva.
Yes, he's a diva, yes.
That's awesome. Well, speaking of great science fiction, Alien and Aliens are both great science fiction, and they do feature a cat. And they're great science fiction for basically completely different reasons, right? Like Alien is great science fiction because it takes the trope of the slasher film and the trope of first contact and the trope of the evil corporation, and just mixes it and takes it to a new level. And part of that is, you know, Sigourney Weaver's performance, and part of that is a killer script, which if you want to learn something about script writing, I recommend reading the script, which is available.
It's also the trope of the haunted house.
Yes.
And you can give H.R. Geiger.
Oh yeah,
for his design.
The design work is amazing. One of my favorite artists.
Create something really alien. That was the most important part of it. If you look at monsters from before that time, to when Alien came up, Aliens monsters were just so alien. They were horrible. They were hard to look at. I think that many people just were like, I just can't look at it. I remember my mother like, no, it's just too horrible. I'm like, yeah, I think that's the whole point of it. It's terror-inducing, and they're terror. Even when I see them later in Aliens, they are not more attractive. I don't find them like I didn't find myself getting used to it. It took a long time for me to look at that design and be like, okay, I could see one of these coming toward me. Coming from let's imagine for a moment they were an intelligent species and they were coming off of the spaceship and they walked out the spaceship and they looked like that. Could I be okay with that? And the answer is probably no. I probably would have to rein in my urge to flee because they induce horror. And that was a thing that was really well done because up until then, for most of us, monster movies were badly designed costumes and, people who barely care. And it's like, the Wolfman, great. He's great. Dracula, great. They were all great. But Alien said, we're going to make an alien that's going to cause you to be traumatized just by looking at it. So we're only going to see a piece here and a piece here. And at the very end, you get to see, it's too late. It's gone. You get almost no real shots of the alien.
Which is part of the genius of that.
Yeah, that was very important to the movie, I think. Very important.
And then when Aliens comes back, you're like, well, we know what it looks like. How scary can it be? Well, that's because you only know what one looks like. When 100 are coming towards you, and you know that shooting them causes acid to fly everywhere. So even in your defense, you're still risking your life. It changed the whole dynamic, and it makes the movie great again. Because
So let's talk about the tropes of Aliens. It's a different genre. The first one is a horror movie. The second one is military science fiction. With a horror element, but it's also found family, right? Yeah. There's the whole Newt is essential to that movie, right? And Ripley goes from survivor to matriarch in that movie, where she is putting together a family with Hicks and Bishop and Newt. And she is fighting her nemesis, So the queen is a genius because not only is it another scary monster that's even scarier and more monstrous and tougher, but it's the equal and opposite of Ripley, right? Because Ripley is the matriarch of her family fighting the matriarch of the alien family for survival, and only one can survive, right? And so, and when she gets into that, cage lifter thing, and takes her on at the same size, that's just a wonderful, that only exists in science fiction, right? So, yeah. So there's a lot of tropes but then there's also like beautiful economy of character moments. Like when the first Alien movie, when they're emerging from hyperspace chronic suspension, sleep, whatever, it's opening like a flower, and they're all like, it's the morning and the flowers are opening up. In Aliens, it's military, right? And they're all in a line, and so they lift up, and the thing you see, the sergeant sits up, and then the first thing he does is he grabs the cigar he had with him in the crowd and sticks it in. It's already chewed on, and you know everything you need to know about that character at that moment.
Everything you need to know is like, yep, I'm good. Now let's get up. Rock and roll.
You know it because he's a trope. He's a walking trope, but that's okay.
That's why I say tropes can work for you as well as against you, because if you do them right, they carry everything that you need, and it's smooth and easy, and your audience settles in. It's like, okay, we know this guy. We don't know this particular guy, but we have a feeling that he's going to be that guy. Tough.
Right, and he is that guy.
He is that guy. He starts off with a cigar in his morning. Before he's had a deep, good, cleansing breath, he's already got a cigar in his mouth. So he's like, yeah, this guy's hard. He's ready to die. He's got no problem. We're going to love this. And we do. We love Ape Home. We love the scenes he appears in. We love Aliens because it is a doomed venture. And you know it from the moment they start talking about aliens. We're going to have to rescue some daughters from their virginity. And I'm like, yeah, you guys are dead. You remember that line? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some daughters from their virginity. I'm like, you guys don't have a chance. You're clueless.
Yeah.
You're looking at them like, really?
This is, yeah. You have no idea what you're about to run into. Yes.
So yes, that's the good science fiction where people connect to the characters, and I think that when they're done right, that is the heart of good storytelling. It's making characters you can connect to, and I think that's really hard to do. And when I look at what goes on in writing today, I find, I don't know, it feels like we've forgotten how to tell good stories. We've insisted that the only stories that matter are the ones that go to the movies, and that anything with any depth, any nuance, we squeezed and homogenized all the nuance out of all our stories. And so, like, as much as I love the Marvel movies, they're still only telling one story, and it's kind of sad. And though don't get it twisted, I love spectacle. I'm a superhero guy. See, big blue S. I'm that guy. I got no problem with this. But at the same time, it would be nice if we were willing to address a little nuance to make the characters a little more human, rather than trying to squeeze out as much spectacle juice as we can in that 2.5 hours that we watch them on the screen, where we know almost nothing about them. Even, when the movie starts, we know nothing. By the time the movie ends, we still know nothing. And it's disappointing, because I feel like we could do so much more if we could care about these characters in a significant way. And I think that movies these days have just stopped doing that.
Which is why Godzilla -0 stomped all over that, or Godzilla -1 stomped all over that, and was such it won the first Oscar for a Godzilla film, and it's a 70-year-old trope, right? Mm-hmm. Like, Godzilla stomps Tokyo. Okay, well, we know that.
12 times before today. So yeah, we're used to this. Where's the new? The new is we're looking at Godzilla as a natural disaster again, but not from the point of watching Godzilla trope around. We're watching it from just the people surviving the horror.
How it affects people.
Yeah. But also, Godzilla is now the kaiju manifestation of survivor guilt.
Yes.
Right? That's new. And you have a character who has a lot of guilt, right? Like a kamikaze pilot who ran away, didn't want to die. And, how we look at that and how his peers look at that, very different. and then he froze when he had a chance to fight Godzilla. And we know what would have happened if he'd fired that gun on Odo Island, right? Like, he would have got stomped.
Nothing.
He wouldn't have won. He wouldn't have saved anyone.
He didn't have survival guilt. He simply just said, I have guilt.
Yeah.
I have guilt because I thought I should have done something, and I realized in that moment, nothing I do matters. And I think that is still a very good character nuance. To have a character recognize in that moment that nothing I do matters, and I'm helpless before this horror. And I think that was what made Godzilla -1 work, was that it pointed out that we are, if you ever watched, and I recommend it, go to YouTube and look at tsunamis in Japan. And what you watch.
I've seen some footage, yeah. It's horrible because you can't.
It's epic. It's epic. You're watching waves just sweeping in, carrying boats, carrying cars down the street, floating buildings away, and you're just watching this in absolute sheer horror. That's what Godzilla -1 did. It just presented you with a natural disaster that just happened to walk around on 2 legs and shoot atomic fire. Same thing.
And there's a point about tropes, though, and Cheryl makes a good point in the chat.
I was about to bring that up, so go for it.
Yeah, so you can use tropes and reuse them, and if you don't make the character something you care about, make what's happening something you care about, it won't work. And that happened to Alien 2. The first 2 movies were very good.
And the next 4 were terrible. 3 were terrible.
Dreadful, yes.
Didn't
From
care
dreadful to only kind of dreadful. That was their range, in my opinion. But if we're talking about how so many of the movies that we see today, even though they're fun to watch and CGI is cool, and I've watched my share of Marvel movies, and I got my whatever it is these days, $14 worth or whatever to see the movie, but no, I'd hardly remember them. They don't stick with me, except for Logan. I'll give Logan credit.
Logan is brilliant because it deconstructs the whole superhero genre, and it does it in the most heartbreaking way you can imagine. And
that's why it's a great
gives you
movie.
hope at the end. Oh my God!
But what books should we be making into great science fiction? And
what's your pick?
Well, I was going to pick. First, I had to mention we just did get a book that was made into a pretty damn good movie in June, and that's a movie that it works. It's not the same as the book, and that's okay. It's pretty close to the book, close enough to be telling the same story but in a different way, and it works. But then my pick that I think would make an absolutely fantastic movie is Nova by Samuel Delany.
Oh, yeah.
And that's using tropes. It's a Grail story for one thing.
Yeah.
And it's a found family story, and it's family rivalry, and it's evil corporations, if you want, and
a great CGI scene at the end.
Yeah, it's just a fantastic story, and I don't know why nobody's thought of making a movie about it. And it could be a 2-hour movie and get the whole story in. It wouldn't have to be a 2-hour and 46 movie and leave out some scenes that when I see people mention these were shot but were cut. If I'm talking about Dune again, I say I wanted to see that scene, but
Sure.
It wouldn't fit.
Yeah, the dinner scene, man. The dinner scene.
Yeah.
But
I want to see 9 Princes of Amber.
Yes.
I think that the science fiction that was written in, that it was one of the fine stories. It's to me, it's perfect for an audience that is now comfortable with the idea of the multiverse. And the 9 Princes in Amber basically is a multiverse spanning adventure tale with reprehensible individuals posing as heroes. And the universe is their playground, and it's got all the rights. We're ripe for that with powerful corporations, powerful CEOs, and these guys are those powerful CEOs. They travel from reality to reality, doing what they want, and then when they're bored, they leave. So imagine an Elon Musk who has the power to travel from one reality to another, make inventions, steal them from one reality, bring them to another, talk about how great they are, and then leave and disappear for years, and no one knows where he's gone. He's literally not in your reality. You cannot find him. I imagine the Nine Princes in Amber would be an amazing place to play, and yet for some reason, I'm watching any number of lesser science fiction showing up again and again and again, and it's very frustrating because there is good science fiction out there.
Michael Moorcock's multiverse.
Michael Moorcock's.
He invented the multiverse, right?
I thought I saw a rumor that Nine Princes in Amber is under development.
Stephen Colbert was working on that as an executive.
That's the rumor, but I won't be.
Yeah,
I want to see somebody talk to me. Don't tell me about it because we've been promising me this film for 25 years. I'm still waiting, so I'll believe it when someone says we have film, we have people, we have film footage, we have shot some stuff. We have got a picture of Amber that I actually care about. I imagine it's going to look a lot like Asgard, but whatever.
Yeah, whatever.
I'll be okay with that as long as I get to see it because there were so many great ideas there. Jack Vance has a bunch of great stories. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's sitting out here that is not getting used. What is wrong with people? Why are we rewatching bad science fiction when there's so much good science fiction just waiting to be seen?
The Stars My Destination would make a great.
There you go.
Great movie.
Right.
Got a lot of them. There's a lot of them. The Forever War. Where are these? These are great stories just waiting to be told.
At least we're finally getting Neuromancer, right? That seems to be happening.
But it feels like it's so late now. We should have had that.
40 years old.
Yeah, we should have had that a long time ago. And I still don't quite understand why the best science fiction seems completely, overlooked. C.J. Cherryh's Foreigner. Excellent stuff. We should be consuming that with vigor. Horatio Hornblower. We got stuff. There's stuff out there. There's stuff out there. We can do it. I'm very sad to watch so much good science fiction falling by the wayside to be replaced with things like, don't get twisted. I like Tremors. Tremors was entertaining.
Tremors was amazing.
Tremors was entertaining. But I sure would have rather they had spent that money on, anything else.
No, I love Tremors.
After the first one, maybe two, but I know there's like 4 or 5 of them. And
there was a whole TV show too. I mean, there is a Tremors verse.
I wouldn't go beyond that. Or a Galaxy Quest.
The first film was utterly brilliant.
Yeah, the first. I'd say the first 2 films I enjoyed. And everything
second one, excellent. Yes.
It just felt like, okay, we could be doing something else with this money.
Right.
I'm just looking for that. When we say there's no science fiction out there to be had, I disagree. I mean, maybe it's a policy issue. Maybe it's a fear of the audience. I think part of it's a fear of having an audience smart enough to enjoy it. But I'm like, if you can handle the multiverse, pretty much anything else that goes on should be easy to do.
Who'd be a cool writer to adapt that you could go on with the same idea forever and ever, the same milieu, if you will, as Ian M. Banks.
Culture.
Yes, the culture. That's right. You were reading my mind. I was like, the culture. It is a great place to tell adventures and every kind of adventure possible, from Stone Age to cosmic future. What is it? Kardashev level 3, level 4. I mean, these guys are basically tapping into the energies of the universe. We can do what we literally can do anything we want to. We just have to want to. And ironically,
could you imagine use of weapons done as a mini series, like with a beginning, middle, and end, like one season where the episodes either alternated between the present and the flashback, or every episode had present and flashback, and then oh my God.
I think the problem is that, when you're looking at writers these days in the writing rooms and the process of writing, having worked in a couple of writing rooms now, I realize why so many series are difficult to get done is that a writing room has 10 people in it, if you're lucky. It's difficult to have for everybody to have the same view of that story, to be adapting it for television and deciding what works, what doesn't, and can we get it done in time. And then, the squeezing of a lot of times they'll find a scene or an idea, they'll squeeze it for an idea, but then they'll lose the premise that made that idea great because we have no build up to it. It just kind of appears. We've got this great idea, there it is, enjoy. But all the lead up that made that idea great in the book is gone. Everything that happens after that is also gone. So you just have this great idea that sits in a moment in space and time, and then it's over, and then people forget about it because they never cared about building up what made it work in the first place. And I think that's why television science fiction is fading. Its light is slowly falling from the skies as we are in connection to that quality of writing. And I think the writing room is a dangerous premise because when a writer writes, they write by themselves. But when a writing room writes, they write as a collection, and it's very difficult to make art when there's 10 people in the room trying to make that.
Sure. So let's end on a high note. Before Bob gives his closing remarks, I would like to ask 2 questions of each of my guests, which is 1, a book or other website or anything else you would like to promote, and 2, an example of great science fiction that maybe we haven't talked about yet. So, does anyone want to go?
Go ahead, Rich.
I could tell a 1-minute anecdote if you need time to think.
Okay.
I can go. For me, it's C.S. Friedman. She wrote a series of books, When True Night Falls,
Cold Fire trilogy.
the Cold Fire trilogy, and she that is my go-to for great speculative fiction. It tells great stories. It has amazing characters. It's an outstanding setting, and it continues to surprise every time you read it. It just has so much depth. The characters are so good and rich and nuanced. It is nearly, for me, one of my perfect books. And even though
It's
I
got
love
a dark character done much better than Anakin Skywalker.
Oh yeah, Gerald Tarrant is a 100% pure bastard, and you love every minute of it. Every time he does something, you're like, oh, he can't be more evil than he was a moment ago. Oh, I was so wrong. He does it so well, so effortlessly. He's effortlessly evil, and that's what makes him brilliant.
Yeah.
He's brilliant as a character. He makes Darth Vader seem like a choir boy.
Right.
So
Excellent. And promote something?
For me, Wicked Fox Games. That's the new place I'm coming to work at.
Okay.
I'm going to be their senior content designer and give them some love as their stuff goes out there. They're going to be making new video games. It's going to be a good time for everybody. It's a woman-run company. They are, so far, I am like wowed by the stuff that I've seen them doing. I think it's going to be outstanding. Give them some
Wicked
love.
Fox Games. Good to
Wicked
know.
Fox Games. Terry Redfield is the CEO, and it's going to be great.
Rich?
Okay, I'm going to promote one of my very favorite writers in the whole world, John Crowley, who writes really fantastic science fiction and fantasy. Engine Summer is my favorite of the science fiction novels. It's just a gorgeous and heartbreaking and bittersweet, beautiful novel. More people should be reading John Crowley. And if I'm going to promote something, I write an awful lot for John O'Neill's website, Blackgate, www.blackgate.com. And lots of other people write a lot for Blackgate, and I find it always interesting and fun. And my upcoming, in 2025, anthology with Eric Schwitzgebel and Helen de Cruz, going to be subtitled The Best Philosophical Science Fiction in the History of the World. We'll come up with a snappy 2-word or something like that title for it eventually, from MIT Press.
Nice. All right, Bob, take it away.
Well, as you guys were talking about this, I got 2 books I'm reading right now. We talk about great science fiction, what makes great science fiction. One is Heinlein's Puppet Masters. I'm struggling with that a little bit, but there's some real things I like about it, and but we could spend a whole show on that one. But another one, Robert Sawyer has a new book coming out. It's out on audio, I think, right now, called The Downloaded. Now, I picked it up thinking it would probably be another piece of the 50 greatest tropes in science fiction. It is fascinating how he handles the concept. I mean, he mixes the concept of interstellar flight with the time it takes to get from here to there, the concept of a downloaded personality, quantum entanglement, a murder mystery, and all of the, I mean, everything that you could ever want. And I have to admit, while Robert Sawyer is a great writer, been around for a while, a lot of good books, some good recognition, I had never read him. But now that I've picked this book up and got, I'm about the third or fourth chapter in, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be picking him up again. As when we're talking about good science fiction, and that's also two examples of science fiction from the long dead golden age. You know, the greats, and science fiction being written today. Good science fiction is being written today, and Thaddeus, one thing you said that I just want to echo: where the hell is my Forever War movie?
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, you're so dead on. That book, every young person who is ever raised on the golden age of science fiction that picks that book up will find and say, oh, wow, you know? And anybody who can read that last chapter and not have just a little bit of moistness in the corner of their eyes is just not somebody I care to know. So
Excellent. So if I could very briefly just plug a couple of things myself. One is for great science fiction, anything by Octavia E. Butler. If you want to start with short stories, start with the Blood Child and other stories. That is brutal and beautiful, and you never want to live your life as an Octavia Butler protagonist because you are hosed from the get-go all the way through. It is just, life is terrible. And then one of my most recent publications is I have the title story in High Noon on Proxima B from Baen Books last year. Just came out in mass market paperback. Did I think to grab a copy and show you the mass market paperback? No, but it just came out in that it was in trade and now it's in mass market. So
now Irene Radford in that with you?
Is who in there with me?
Irene Radford?
No, but Ken Scholes is in there with me.
Oh.
Yeah. And it's edited by David Boop, and
David Boop.
Walter John Williams is in there with me, which is exciting to me because he was one of the people. Also a great science fiction writer. Hardwired, read that. He's one of the great science fiction writers that I grew up reading. You know, and then here I am in a book with him, so it's very exciting to me. I'm still not quite over that.
Okay, somebody just made a comment about E. Doc Smith. Is that somebody that is worth picking up and reading, even though he hasn't written anything in my lifetime?
All right, so E. Doc Smith is a weird mix because there are a lot of great ideas. You know, matter of fact, a lot of what we know as science fiction today descends from the over-the-top stuff of E. Doc Smith. Is it great writing? Probably not. Probably not. Let's go ahead and say no. But if you want to know where a lot of the ideas that we've looked at today and take for granted came from, E. Doc Smith was a lunatic. And he was a brilliant lunatic, and he told really over-the-top stories, and they were great in their period because there was nothing like them. Today, we have so much stuff that's like them. We look at what he did, and it feels almost like a cartoon. It's so weird. But it's still... I liked it, and when I read it a long time ago, I liked it, and then I reread it just recently. I was like, yeah, this is like watching cartoons from the 60s and 70s, where it's like, yes, we know what happened to them. We know how great Superman looks today, but if you look at Superman in the 1960s, not so good looking. But we can respect it because someone was able to sell it in a time where no one knew those ideas existed, and he was able to make a living producing these weird ideas, and they have become the genesis of modern stuff. Now, one of the questions I want to ask is, and we should talk about at some point, is how do we tell science fiction that does not depend on things like E.E. Doc Smith? I think that's a whole conversation we should have, because I feel like right now science fiction is very derivative of 20 voices from a period from the 30s to the 60s that pretty much defines a lot of our science fiction. And I was wondering what we're going to talk about when we start trying to find modern stuff. What's the difference between modern sci-fi and what we call the golden age of science fiction? And is it possible to tell stories that don't derive from that golden age? Where are the best stories of the non-derivative function? I mean, when I try to write, I try to be as less derivative, not because I don't love those old guys, but because I feel like we have enough issues in our new world that maybe we should try having some new ideas. I mean, really new ideas, radically new ideas. And I feel like science fiction has lost a lot of that radical edge. From time to time, I see it appear. John Scalzi will do something really strange. But I find that a lot of our ideas are just derivative of old ideas. And is it possible to escape any of those ideas? Can we tell stories that are completely free from that? And I don't know if we can.
I wrote it down. Maybe we will do another one of these.
Gosh, we've got, I understand we may not have an infinite lifetimes for us because, I've heard that the sun's going to explode someday and destroy the earth. But between now and then, B-Cube Sunday's got a lot of Sundays left to go. And I would look forward to having each and every one on the screen back. You're all great to have. Now, I am actually, this is something I am loath to say, but I'm still working on next week's show because I plan out my shows except for those ones where I have 5 Sundays in a month. And I just blew that. But the Sunday after that, on the last Sunday, the 31st, just a reminder that we have David Gerald and Jim Wright coming to do last Sunday.
Whatever it is they do, which is always worth viewing.
And they rant at each other, occasionally talk, sometimes lets each other talk.
Sometimes.
But they do such a great job of it. And when you look at the lifetime experience of these two people, ranging from, hey, I wrote The Trouble with Tribbles, to, and I was military intelligence who figured out where to put bombs, and everything in between that these people have experienced. They're both spectacular writers and thinkers, and they will be here on the 31st. Say what?
Right here.
Right here.
Right here.
And
listen to your podcast.
They're just phenomenal to hear from. And also, we will be promoting more and more this fall. We have a book called Breaking Up is Hard to Do, coming out from B-Cube Press by a incredible team of writers called Sumner Brooks. It's very much about what happens when people work hard to break up our country. And the real difficulty with that book has been staying ahead of the headlines. I mean, there are scenes we've literally had to cut because we're not writing history. So I will look forward to when we can get the Sumner Brooks team on here to talk about that. So you guys all have a great day. And any last words before you wave goodbye?
Just that there's a lot of great science fiction out there. Go find it. Read it.
Thank you for having me. And you guys are right. There's plenty of good sci-fi out there. There's so many things to read, so many things to watch. Don't give up. Moon Girl, Devil Dinosaur.
Yeah. I remember Devil Dinosaur in the day, and Moon Girl is one of the best reinventions of anything ever.
Did you just say Moonfall?
Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. An animated series that came out, and I know you're laughing, but trust me, you're going to watch this thing, and you're going to laugh yourself into a coma because it is that funny. I love this series, and I hate television. I love this series.
So, thank you, Thaddeus. Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Bob, for having us. Thank you, live studio audience. Thank you, future generations watching this. Thank you, PhD candidates 100 years from now having to sit through this footage to talk about your thesis on science fiction.
Now that's just enough to make your testicles cringe. Well,
nice to meet you, Rich.